Hello, podcast listeners. First up, thank you so much for listening to and supporting the podcast. We really, really appreciate it. We love doing it and we love getting the amazing comments in from all of you. Just a quick reminder that the Your Success book is out now on amazon.co.uk and amazon.com. It's currently available in both paperback and Kindle, and the audiobook will be coming out in 2019. Head to tiny.cc/yourbook to check it out. That's tiny.cc/yourbook to check it out. Now, on with the podcast.
Welcome to Your Success Podcast. We give you actionable insight and stories behind real-life success wherever you go. Here are your hosts, Angelos and Mo.
Welcome to Your Success Podcast. I'm Angelos.
And I'm Mo. And today we're covering a rather morbid, albeit completely essential part of success planning, which is wills and power of attorney. Many people don't like to think about dying, but along with taxes, it is one of the only guaranteed things in the world.
So today we are joined by Alan Paddy Porter from the Will Centre. Paddy, thank you for joining us today.
Real pleasure.
And Paddy, you're also a trustee of the Chestnut Appeal, which helps men's health, specifically helping with prostate, testicular and penile cancer, which I know is a very important and dear subject for you to support that charity. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well, aren't we? So first things first, on this lovely rainy day in Plymouth, what is a will?
Well, essentially a will is a written document which you write down your wishes that lays out what you want to happen to your assets, who you want to look after your children if they're under 18, who will sort things out for you, they're called executors, and who inherits, they're called beneficiaries. So that's essentially what it is. It has to be done in the requirements are in the Wills Act, which goes back to the 1800s, about what constitutes a valid will. So, for example, if I'm at death's door and I turn around to you, Angelos, and said, I want to leave everything to Mo.
That's fine. Go ahead. Just go ahead.
Mo will be happy, but that's not a valid will.
Oh, that's right.
Unless I was a serviceman on active service, as I was this time in 1982, if I'm being shot and I'm dying and I say that to you, under an Act of Parliament that deals with the armed forces, that is deemed to be a valid will. It's the only will that is valid that doesn't have to be signed and witnessed.
What about a priest? Could you, on your deathbed,
No, not unless you're in active service.
Right, how interesting.
That is interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so surely if I don't have a will, and then all my money and other assets will just go to my kids and my partner, right?
Well, the good thing is you don't have to worry about it if you don't have a will, because they have these rules in our country called the laws or the rules of intestacy. So if you don't have a will, essentially the law will take over and it will say whatever you have goes to certain people. So, for example, you're married. I understand you have a child.
Happily married.
Happily married. Have a happy, healthy
qualification there, happily married.
Yeah, thanks, Mo.
But if you don't have a will, then the law says that the first one, £250,000 worth of your assets go to you, go to your wife, sorry. All your personal belongings, so your much valued Star Trek collection, for example.
Your 55-inch TV. Yeah.
Basically, all those personal possessions go to your wife. And let's say, for example, your estate was worth $450,000, because that just makes the maths easier. Mm-hmm. So she's entitled to $250,000 outright. Half of that, so another £100,000 on top, and that other £100,000 is for your child or children, and that would be held until they reached adulthood. Now, for the vast majority of people, if you've only been married once and you've only got children from one person, that's fine. But let's imagine you're on your second or third or fourth marriage, let's say second, and you've got 2 children from your first marriage and 1 from your second marriage, and your estate again is $450,000. That $100,000 that goes to children, 2/3 of that will go to the children from the first marriage.
So we're going to talk a little bit about that later on, aren't we? About what happens if you were married before, and I know you've got a few interesting case studies.
Yeah.
Just very quickly, Paddy, because I float flew to Greece a few months ago, and I thought to myself, I need to update my will, which I haven't done in a little while, and there's various bits and bobs which are outstanding in my estate. So I text Thea. I said, look, Thea, if anything goes wrong, and I'm putting this on record now, so I'm not sure if this counts. If anything happens to me, I want Mo to look after things until you're up and running. And I text Mo. I said, look, if anything happens to me, please can you look after it? He said, yeah, of course, it'd be a real pleasure, because working with you is awesome. So does that count as a valid... No,
because it doesn't fulfill the requirements of the Wills Act.
Right. Okay.
So it's not in writing, or what they call holographic. Now, that's nothing to do with Star Trek. It basically means in writing. So, for example, if you'd done that on a video, as you often see in TV plays, the video will, that's not a legal document. It's a nice, interesting plot device because, of course, the elderly gentleman can leave everything to the dolly bird nurse, and then he can then embarrass everyone else by saying you've got nothing. But it's not legal invalid. Now he could write a legal invalid will and have it signed and witnessed correctly, and then do that video to explain it. But that video in itself, as your text or as your video to Mo,
does not count. Interesting.
So, but you mentioned holidays. It's really interesting because there are. At the holiday time, you're on the plane, as you've clearly experienced, and you think, oh my God, what if it flies into a tall building or the Acropolis?
Heaven forbid.
And, I mean, it needs a bit of work, doesn't it?
You'd probably improve it.
So you promise yourself that the minute you will get back, one of the very first things you'll do is make a will. And, of course, the minute you get back, it's not important anymore because you're home and you're safe. So next year when you go on holiday, suddenly that experience from last year comes back and you think, oh my God, what about the will? And that's when we tend to, coming into the summer holidays, that's when we tend to get a spike in people who are going on holiday.
So people contemplate their own mortality when they're on this metal cylinder rather than when they're actually on...
Well, I mean, say, for example, we've unfortunately had some very bad air accidents recently or planes flying into tall buildings. If you're about to go on holiday and there is a air crash and you're flying with Aeroflot or some other airline, or you're flying off to America, or you're going on a cruise and a cruise ship runs aground, or years ago we had somebody who was going on a very long train journey across a continent and there was a massive train crash, lots of people died. Suddenly that makes you think, oh, I must make a will. So there has to be a trigger event. No one wakes up one morning and says, it's raining. You know, that plan I had to go out on that lovely walk and a nice meal outside, al fresco, I can't do that, so I'll do the will thing. Equally, you know, they don't wake up in the morning and see the sun shining and the birds are tweeting and they're full of the joys of the time of the year. They think, oh, I feel really good, I'll do that will thing. There has to be a trigger event. And so holidays is a classic.
Talking about trigger events, I suppose it's a good opportunity to talk about the chestnut appeal. Do you find that when people have certain diagnoses, that then triggers them on to...
Yes, that's another trigger event. So after the Christmas and New Year break, they went back into the office. The first 2 phone calls we had at the Will Centre was from the financial advisor of an existing client who was in Derriford Hospital. Now, we'd done her will a few years ago, but she was terminally ill and she wanted to make some little tweaks, little changes, because circumstances had changed. And that's really important because although only about 30% of people make wills, half of them are rather no longer relevant in part or in full. So only about 15% of the population have a legal invalid will. About 15% probably have a will, but it's probably not up to date. And I've had people tell me that, you know, need to change the will because everyone is dead. And then the other 70% always think about it. So the first call was from that client. So I made an appointment the very same day to go and see her in hospital. And the second call was from a lady whose father was terminally ill. So the first 2 phone calls after Christmas, New Year. So I went to see them both on the same day. My client in Derriford clearly wasn't well, but it wasn't going to be imminent, but it was probably going to be in the next few weeks. When I went to see my new client, it was very obvious that he didn't have a lot of time left. So I went to see him on the Wednesday, took his instructions. We witnessed his will on the Monday, the week after, and he died on the Thursday. Now, it's a tragic situation clearly. And the two daughters who had the appointment were very upset by the whole thing, naturally. And, I could say, well, wouldn't it have been better if he had done it maybe 2 or 3 years ago, made sure it was up to date, and then when he got the bad news he was terminally ill, he could have spent that time in a better way instead of having to scrabble around and make a will. So that's why no one does it because it's a good idea. People do it because they have to.
Yeah. Okay, and do you want to talk to us a little bit about the Chestnut Appeal that you're
Yes, the Chestnut Appeal is a charity that's set up to deal with, initially it was prostate cancer, which is the largest single-sex cancer killer. Only men have a prostate. It's a chestnut-sized, hence the chestnut that helps regulate flow, urine, semen, etc. And it is, because of that, about 1 in 4 men of African descent, about 1 in 8 men of non-African descent will get prostate cancer at some point in their life. Now, unlike breast cancer, where there's a screening program, and cervical cancer, where there's a screening program, there's no screening program for male cancers like prostate cancer. And then one of the reasons is the only way to sort of test for it is to get a blood test. So if you're 50 and male, and you display some classic symptoms like going to the toilet quite a lot, you're passing blood in your urine, and if you go on to Google and put in symptoms of prostate cancer, you'll find them all on there. You would normally go along to your doctor and ask for what's called a PSA test. So it tests for the antigen of the cancer in your blood. Now that result isn't always necessarily accurate. It can be a false positive or false negative. So for example, you could have a fine PSA for your age, and it does go up because you're more likely to get prostate cancer the older you get. And it could be clear, but you could possibly have prostate cancer. Or vice versa, you can have a high reading and actually be okay. The only real way to do it, I'm afraid, is if there's any concerns, even if the PSA isn't conclusive, is you go up to the hospital and basically somebody sticks a finger up your arse and tests the prostate.
Right.
Now, the prostate will get larger as time passes. Right. And if there's any concerns, then they can go and take a biopsy. Like a woman would have a biopsy if she had a tumour. And we raise funds to get more accurate diagnosis. But 1 in 4 men 1 in 6 men will get it. So if you have any doubt, guys, get along to the doctor. I do a bit of posting on social media, and as a result, a friend of mine badgered her husband. Eventually he went to the doctor, found out his PSA was very high, got an examination and was discovered he had prostate cancer. Because of that, he's now on an active program of monitoring, so his outcomes are much better than had he not done it. So basically, over 50, have your PSA checked.
Yeah, that's really good, spreading the awareness of that, definitely.
And then we just branched in, just very briefly, into testicular and penile cancer. That's becoming more prevalent. So certainly, but prostate was the main thrust, and always has been, no pun intended.
Yeah, indeed. And you can't have an X-ray or anything like that, it doesn't work. You have to.
No, with the traditional way of identifying where you would take a biopsy, a woman would have an MRI scan, and they'd go, right, that's where the tumour is, so we will definitely take a sample there. Traditionally with prostate, it was an ultrasound. So it was, I think we might take a biopsy there, I think we might take one there, so there'd be like a stab in the dark. But now we've got an MRI fusion scanner, so we can overlay an MRI with a ultrasound and more accurate targeting, because obviously every biopsy can cause problems and side effects. And it's very painful.
You want to reduce the
absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so that's very interesting and good to spread the word. And we've put the link to we've put the link to the Will Centre, but we'll also put the link to the Chestnut Appeal on this page as well.
Cool. So Paddy, we looked at wills briefly. What is a power of attorney?
Well, a will only comes into effect essentially the day you die. It's a legal document, but has no legal effect until the day you die, which hopefully for all of us and everyone watching and listening is a long way off yet. But if during your lifetime you get to a situation where you can't look after your property and financial affairs, so for example, if you have a stroke, so you essentially can't sign any paperwork. So if you're buying a property and you need to sign the contracts and you had a stroke, then nothing will happen. So that's one reason. So some physical reason, ski accident, paralysed from the neck down, paraplegic in a wheelchair. So, no one will be able to access your bank account, no one will be able to sell property because you have to sign or buy property. So anything that requires a signature, that won't happen. And also it will cover, certain types of powers of attorney will cover loss of capacity, so that's dementia, Alzheimer's, that sort of thing. But a power of attorney only applies from the day you make it to the day you die. So the day you die, that's literally just chucked in the bin, and out comes the will. So powers of attorney now, wills when you go.
So can you so let's say husband-wife.
Yeah.
Wife needs power of attorney because she's slowly losing her marbles, to put it nicely. And she says, right, husband, I want you to effectively run my estate. Could they make co-decisions, or it's either or?
Well, what normally happens in a power of attorney is you would appoint one or more people called your attorneys, not to be confused with an American lawyer, to look after your, in this case, property and financial affairs. Now, if it's husband and wife and you own a property as joint tenants, you can't sign to sell the property on each other's behalf, because you could go out one day, come home and find someone's moved in because the missus has signed her half and signed your half as well. Yeah. So you have to have an independent party. So in a normal situation, husband and wife, say with 2 adult children, would appoint each other and the 2 adult children. So you'd have a wife plus kids, wife would have you plus kids, joint and several, so that means either or. It has to be several if there's a jointly owned asset like a property. And then if, say for example, you had a stroke and you couldn't sign the paperwork and you had to move from your house, which is no longer appropriate for your circumstances because you can't get up the stairs or whatever, then your children would sign for you and your wife would sign for herself.
Right, I'm with you.
So that's the way it works. If you appoint the attorneys jointly and one dies, then the power of attorney fails. So there are situations where, say you had 2 children, I had a client recently, 2 children, they don't get on with each other. One thinks the other one's trying to force their mum to do things, so it just depends who you're talking to. So in that case, it was appropriate to appoint jointly, so they both have to sign and agree everything. So they're confident that the other one can't go off and do something without the other person knowing.
So talking of things going wrong or not going to plan, can you share...
Good segue.
Yeah.
Like that.
Can you share with us maybe a couple of case studies about wills or powers of attorney? Where
if you've got about 5 years, I could go through my 25-year experience.
I thought you were going to answer the next one about divorce.
I'll come back in a minute.
I know you've got a couple of case studies, Paddy. Could you share them with our listeners?
Well, the classic case would be a husband and wife, and they're married for the second time. And Mr. has 2 kids from his first marriage, adult children. The wife has 2 kids from her first marriage, adult, but they have no children together. Now, the classic sort of family will would be husband to wife, wife to husband, and then when they die, to the children equally. So they could make a will where you could leave your wife the money, vice versa, and then the 4 kids. But the danger is that the survivor can change their will. So, for example, marriage automatically null and voids a will. So let's say in that situation, Mrs. dies, Mr. suddenly he's got a lot of money, young Dolly bird down the pub, knows that, ingratiates herself to him, gets married. He then can't stand the pace, so to speak, and he dies. So the kids don't get anything, and the new wife gets a lot, either under the laws of intestacy, if it's depending on the values, or if they make a will. So that can happen. But of course, people don't think it can happen. Now, I had a situation about 15 years ago where I sat at a table like this, husband and wife. They wanted to leave everything to each other and then to the 4 kids equally. And I explained that the survivor could change the will. But no, they looked at each other and they said, darling, you'll make sure my kids are looked after. Absolutely, darling. And I'll do the same for you. Thank you, darling. And I explained that they could protect, and I'll explain how that could happen in a minute. Sadly, and very unexpectedly, he died 6 months later. And I get called up probably about another 3 months after that to go back, and I sat around exactly the same table, except obviously there was only one person there, and she wanted to change a will and write his kids out. And I said, just asked why. And she said, well, when he died, the kids came in mob-handed, essentially, and wanted to know what their dad had left them. And they really upset me. So I'm taking them out of the will. Now, you can see how that might happen. But equally, they promised each other. And I remember the conversation. I could even take you to the house right now, because I know exactly where it is. 15 years ago, I could take you to the exact house where that happened. But they could have avoided it. But the advice that I gave them, they chose not to take, which is fine.
So even though you were a witness to that, his wishes, she overrided that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the way to protect it is this. So let's assume that those couple, they own their own house. Let's assume it's worth £200,000. Let's assume they have another £20,000 worth in cash, for example. They probably own that property as joint tenants. So if you own it as joint tenants, if you die, it's yours. If you die, it's yours. Okay, so you can't give your half share of the property to anyone. Passes under a law called survivorship. But if you change that from joint tenants to tenants in common, you would own distinct share eaches, normally 50-50. Although I did have someone in the office today who owns it 70-30. And that's possible where, say, one person puts more money into a property than the other person. And what would happen is, if Mr. was to die first, he would leave half of his property to his children. So that's £100,000. But he would give his spouse the right to live in his half. She has her own half already, so she can't be chucked out on the streets. And then on her subsequent death, the children from the first to die will get the half share. So they're guaranteed to get it, but not until the second person dies. And then they could leave it, and she did the same in her will. And then the 20 grand obviously went to the survivor. So even if, say, the kids wind the survivor up and she decides to change her will, she can't disinherit the kids from the 100,000 quid. So that's the simple way to do it. But they didn't want to do it because, of course, they promised each other, they looked lovingly into each other's eyes and made a promise. But unfortunately, blood isn't necessarily thicker than water. And once money is involved, and, you know, in a way you could see why she was upset. There we are.
Yeah.
We did have a situation recently where we had a client who was married for the second time, and he had a child from his first marriage, and he owned the property in his own name. But he only wanted to leave his wife. The house was worth about 200,000. There was about 30,000 and 50,000 in cash, but he wanted to leave the second wife 30 grand, and the house and everything else to his daughter.
Yeah.
Now, and he was terminally ill. Again, another terminally ill case. When we saw him, we explained that, I'll come back to what's called the Inheritance Act in a minute, but she would have to be chucked out of the house and home. He had a bit of a thing because his first wife apparently run off with an Italian waiter. And he didn't want that happening in this particular case if he died first. So he wanted to make sure his daughter got the money, the majority of the estate. So we pointed out that she could challenge under the Inheritance Act, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But what he could do was do this life interest in property. He could give her the right to live in that property during her lifetime, and then when she died, it would go to the daughter. So the daughter would get the money straight away pretty much, but she'd have to wait for the major inheritance. Now, he felt that £190 was a bit too much to pay for that, and he didn't see why he had to do it, because surely it was right that his daughter had the money, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
We did point out that under the Inheritance Act, under English law, you can leave whoever you want, whatever you have to whoever you want. So I could leave it to you, I could leave it to somebody I met down the pub, somebody I walk the dog with, I could leave it to a charity, no problem. I don't have to leave it to my spouse or my children or my sort of common law wife, although that term doesn't really exist in terms of inheritance. So if I leave those people out, they can challenge my will for financial provision. So the spouse, there's a very long story about he kept the will and they couldn't find it for ages, but eventually they did find it. But she could have literally, and she did, she went to see a solicitor because she'd have to leave the house. And the solicitor pointed out quite rightly that she was entitled to a claim under the Inheritance Act because she would be homeless. Now, with what's called contentious probate, once you get into that, it's the costs start to escalate, and if it ever goes to a court, the loser pays all the costs. So they pay the costs of both sides. So it's a bit like a game of poker. Anyway, they didn't settle it before it went to court. And the end result was, initially the wife was getting £30,000 and that was it. Everything else going to the daughter. At the end of the court case, she got £30,000 and she got the house. Completely.
Wow.
Not the right to live in it for the rest of her life, but completely. So the daughter lost out by about 200 grand because he wasn't prepared to pay another £190 for the extra work required to make sure she was protected. And, you know, the most expensive advice you can ever have is the one you don't pay for.
Or free advice.
Free advice, you know.
Exactly.
My mate down the pub says.
Yeah. John down the road.
I went on Google and it says this, you know, so.
Good old Google.
So and it's unfortunate because.
But you think of it from a daughter's point of view, that's the father's legacy.
Yeah.
So the memory of her father is now tainted because of this.
Yeah. I mean, we sort of use a tagline occasionally. It was, how will you be remembered? Obviously a pun on the will bit. But I don't know how you'd like to be remembered, but I'd quite like to be remembered as, he was a nice guy, you know, you like the old pint of Guinness, you know, a bit of a cliche, you know, if you needed any help, he would always help you, you know, and he sorted out a will, which you would expect, and I'm on my fourth, you know, the kids were looked after, whatever. But often people who die without wills are not remembered for all the good things they did in their life. They're remembered for, well, he should have known better. He should have made a will. He should have done this. He should have done that. So they're often remembered for the things they didn't do as opposed to things they should have done. Yeah. And that's really sad.
Yeah, definitely. It's great advice, Paddy. This podcast is all about success, and as such, we do ask every guest that comes on the podcast, what does success mean to you?
Well, I've only ever had 2 jobs in my life, 18 years in the Royal Navy, nuclear submarines, and then I set up my own business. And I did it because I basically didn't want to take orders off anyone anymore. So it doesn't matter if you are a captain or an admiral, there's always somebody above you telling you what to do. So I'd had enough of that. Yeah. Now, setting up in business just because you don't take orders off anyone or be beholden to anyone is never really a good idea, because a high percentage of businesses fail in the first 3 years. But I was lucky. I got a good redundancy package from the Navy, so I could do what I wanted as opposed to have to earn a wage straight away. So I decided to get into wills in particular because so few people had them. And the traditional model was you go to see somebody in their office when they're free. And one of the reasons a lot of people don't make wills is they can't get time off to go and see somebody. And I looked around at lots of other opportunities, but that was the one that struck me, and also to try and turn things on its head and do things completely differently. So we would go and see clients at home. So from that, I started out in my dining room. Very quickly, within 18 months, I had a backstreet office. About another 3 years, I had a high street office, which I rented. And then that's when I sort of got into property, because I bought my own business premises. So instead of paying rent to somebody else, I was essentially paying it to me. And that started my property journey. So it's about building something, okay, which is quite appropriate for property. Yeah. And I know you guys, a bit like me, we bought some fairly interesting properties and spent a few quid on them and turned them into good accommodation for people to live in. So that's really good. And I've been very lucky along the way to understand that the only way to grow a business is to leverage other people. So getting a bookkeeper in, for example, employing people who will do the basic admin tasks, because the money's not made, signing bits of paper. It's made seeing people or doing viewings, etc. So, and also, I guess, legacy. I know it's a bit of a pun with a willed reference there, but it is about leaving something, to my children. My daughter now works for me, so she's going to be taking on and running the business in the next few years, so I can go off and enjoy the fruits of my labour. So
it's controlling your destiny, and creating and then leaving that legacy behind. Yeah.
Do you think being self-employed and running your own business has given you more time and contacts to be able to share the message around the chestnut appeal and things like that?
I think, initially when you start a business, you're working 60, 70 hours a week, so you don't really have much time to do anything else. But as the business has grown and become more successful, of course it allows you to get into other things. I would encourage anyone who's in business or runs their own business at when the business is running reasonably well, to get involved in some other form of voluntary work, whether it's a charity, something that's close to your heart. I've never had a history of prostate cancer in my family, but I knew it was a very underfunded charity, and I was asked to come and help because I was a business person to give it a business perspective. So if you can get involved, if you've lost maybe a family member through a particular illness, you might want to get involved in that, or you might feel you want to get involved in a particular charity. Obviously, the environment's very popular these days. It might be to do with homelessness, but I would absolutely encourage everyone to get involved with something because, it's the giver's gain. There's nothing better. If you give something, you don't have to get anything back except that you're helping out.
And it's partly that around that legacy piece as well, and what do you want to be remembered for? Just like making a load of money, or actually contributing to the world through business and through. Well,
you can make all the money you want in the world, and I think the owner of ASOS has just buried his 3 children. Very successful. They were killed in that Sri Lankan attack. So he had all the success. He built a massive business. Yet unfortunately, that didn't protect his children. Yeah. So, it's about living your life. It's about not having any regrets necessarily, and leaving that legacy.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are still barbarians out there who think this is acceptable.
Yeah.
But that's another subject for another time. So this subject could be talked about for days, Paddy, because I'm sure you've got hundreds of case studies.
In my book.
What's the best way for people to get in touch with you? Should they be interested in discussing this in more detail, or want to ask for your services?
Well, if they just want to telephone the office or contact me by email, I'll give you the details and you can put it up there. I'm quite happy to sort of offer some free initial advice. You don't have to be in Plymouth. I can only really see you to do some work if you're in Plymouth, because I have certain money laundering requirements and identity checks to do to make sure I'm not doing a will for a little old granny who's actually somebody who's not a little old granny and has been made up to look like so. And that has happened. Not to me, but it has happened to somebody else.
So what are those details then, Paddy? So what's the number and what's the email address?
So the telephone number is Plymouth, that's 01752 607040. My email is alan.p, that's alan.p at the Will Centre. So that's THEWILLCNTRE.com. Or through www.thewillcentre.com.
Brilliant.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Paddy. Appreciate you. You're a really busy man. We want to know your thoughts at home on wills and powers of attorney. Have you had any interesting experience with them? How's it worked out for you? And have you got a will? Let us know. It'd be good to do a little snap survey of how many people out there have actually got a will in place.
The strange thing when you ask somebody if they've got a will, there's 2 answers, yes or no. Now, if somebody says no, you can be 100% guaranteed they don't have a will. If they say yes, that means one of 3 things. It means, yes, I have got a will. In fact, I've just done it recently, so it's up to date. It matches my circumstances. Or, as I've already said, it means, yes, I've got a will, but I did it 20 years ago and everyone in it's dead, or circumstances have changed. Or they feel really foolish that they haven't done a will and they don't want to admit it, so they say yes anyway.
Yeah, so. Yeah. So please let us know at home if you would say no or yes to that question, and if the yes was actually no hidden. Get in touch on hello@yoursuccesspodcast.com or via our many social media platforms on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn. And please don't forget that Your Success book is still available on Amazon. You mentioned you were going to write a book. Well, you've already written a will, hopefully.
No, I'm on my 4th.
Yeah.
And I think there are so many funny stories and sad stories, but sort of good educational.
Have you got a title for the book yet? Working title?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, Paddy, don't get me started.
Maybe people could write in.
Yes. Yeah. Suggestions.
Dealing with death.
What was that one you said earlier you used to use for the strapline for your business?
How will I be remembered?
I like that.
I like that.
That's quite good, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, I've got really
copyright, trademark.
Oh, and if anyone's got any favourite songs at their funerals, like Stairway to Heaven, obviously, Going Underground. That's always a good.
Can I just say, so it's on record.
Yeah.
For my funeral, I don't want people crying. I want them to
not
be
legally valid, by the way. The funny thing is, funeral directions are the only thing in your will that is not legally binding.
Is it?
No.
Really?
So you can say you want to be cremated, and your executors can bury you.
Interesting. What? Do you know what I said? Right, I'm going to share this with everyone. I don't care, quite frankly. So many years ago, I booked an appointment with someone, solicitor, And they asked, how do you want to be buried? Or, cremated, buried. I said, I want to be buried, please. But I want to make sure that you bury me with a GPS phone.
Yeah.
Because if anything goes wrong and you bury me by mistake and I'm still alive, I can still make a call. And they started laughing. They it's hilarious. And then they saw the look on my face and realised, actually, he's being serious, this crazy guy. I said to him, it's really, really important that it's got credit. Because you can have the technology, but if it's got no credit, I can't make the call. So that's actually in my will. So I probably need to get that updated.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because back in days of yore, I'm Royal Navy, ex-Royal Navy, but when they used to bury sailors at sea, they have a shroud, and it's stitched up from the bottom, and the last stitch goes through the nose. And the reason why that is, it's one of the most sensitive parts of the body, because there have been instances of people being chucked over the side, after the padre said his bits and pieces, and then suddenly it's, you can see struggling from inside, but it's a weighted shroud, so it just goes to the bottom. So with the stitch through the nose, if they, say they were in an unconscious state but still alive, that would wake them up.
That could be a bit awkward. Crap, we made that mistake. I don't know, let's let it go.
And the other thing, if you're scattering ashes, I always suggest downwind.
Father.
Well, again, I've got a very funny story about that too, about the helicopter, but maybe that's for another time.
Save it for the book, and then people can look at it for the book. So, Paddy's book's, when's your book coming out? Public accountability?
Oh, I don't know, say in about 5 years.
No.
When I'm in my motorhome going around.
This year, next year?
I'd say in 5 years' time.
5 years' time.
Yeah.
Well, if you need any help, Paddy, we've written a number one best-selling book. We can more than help you.
Okay, thank you.
And that number one best-selling book Angelos is talking about is called Your Success Book. It's available on Amazon.
Which I've got.
And do you enjoy it?
Absolutely.
Excellent.
You were featured in it as well.
Yeah. So head to tiny.cc/yourbook to get access or to get a copy of the book, and also get access to the free Your Success Toolkit, which you can download to put the theory into practice.
Brilliant. So thanks again, Paddy, for joining us today. And thanks to you at home for listening to Your Success Podcast. I've been Angelos.
I've been Mo.
And see you again on the next exciting episode.
You have been listening to Your Success Podcast. Click subscribe for more incredible content. More details can be found at www.yoursuccesspodcast.com.